Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is Catharine Bramkamp, and we're going to be talking to her about her book, Out Loud, A Writing Adventure for Women. And I've got questions about that title. Catharine, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you. It's delightful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. We'll get to your bio in just a minute, but as those familiar with the show are familiar, we like to start things off talking about things we may have read or watched lately. I'll go first, just to give Catharine a little time to collect her thoughts. I've been busy. So the stuff I've been watching, there's a movie on Apple TV called The Gorge. That was a fun, I don't know, action thriller with a little monster sci-fi element to it. That was fun. My wife had originally started watching it, and then she got like 20 minutes in and lost interest. But I said, "Oh, would you be open to watching it with me?" She said, "Sure." And we got to a certain point, and she said, "This is where I lost interest." And so she kind of held in there with me. Hold on one second. Of course, my daughter decides to send a text right now. This is live recording. Yes, and
Right.
so am I. No problem. Okay, so I watched The Gorge, and one of our neighborhood theaters, they had a special screening, I guess a restored version of A Hard Day's Night, which I haven't seen in years, and went to that. It was really a crowded house too, so that was kind of exciting that there were so many people there to see this movie from I think '64, like right after the Beatles became huge. And then another theater in this cluster of neighborhood theaters, they were showing the classic Jason and the Argonauts, which I like to call Harryhausen skeleton fight, because I hadn't seen that in years. It's very different to see a Ray Harryhausen effects movie on the big screen because it's special effects, but it still looks really impressive, and his work is always great. So that was a lot of fun, and it was actually a lot longer than I expected. It's like an hour 45, which I did
Huh.
not realize.
It was
Still fun.
longer back then.
Yeah, yeah, but it was still really good. Of course, everybody's white and British, so except for the lead who's American. Uh, and stuff stuff we've been watching on TV. We started watching this weekend and we're almost done with it. It's on Netflix. It's called The Residence, which is a mystery comedy set around a murder in the White House, and it's really good and really funny. And it's eight episodes, and we still have numbers 7 and 8 to go. So we're going to probably get to that tonight or the next day. But if you haven't seen that, if you love that kind of genre, you're going to love this. And I remember starting watching this when lockdown started, so like 5 years ago, and it was on, excuse me, it was on Hulu, and then they yanked it right out, like a few episodes after I started watching it. Stanley Tucci searching for Italy,
Oh, yeah.
and it's pretty much an eating tour of Italy with Stanley Tucci, and he goes through, I guess there are 20 regions of Italy, and each episode is him exploring a region and trying the food. Like I just restarted it, and the first one is Naples and the Amalfi Coast, and like Naples, the birthplace of pizza, and talking about this thing, and you watch this, and you just are so compelled, I have to go to Italy and start eating. And you don't care what the consequences are because it looks so great. And the way it's presented and the way he narrates and his involvement, it's so much fun. And, it's one of those, you watch this and it makes you want to go there and do the exact same thing. So I don't think my wallet or my stomach could take it, but it's lovely to think about. So yes, I know I had an extensive list this time, but I've talked enough. Catherine, what about you? What have you been reading or watching lately?
What have I been reading and watching? Well, I'm working on another book on creativity because that's something that people have come away from with my current book Out Loud. And so my latest book, I'm just finishing up again, Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, which is a great book on creativity and on the muse and on giving permission to write. And then I also finished a book called Visual Intelligence by Amy Herman. I'll hold it up so you can see it. And
Okay.
I picked it up when I was traveling in Washington, D.C. This January. I went to D.C. for to go see a a art exhibit. And it's fascinating because she uses art as a way to refocus people's attention so
Hmm.
that the more you look and observe art, the more that'll transfer and you can look at your world and bypass your basic, what do you call bias confirmations. So I thought that it was a really interesting approach. And then we did see the gorge with and we walked through the whole thing, and it was just you're right. You start watching it, it's like where is this gonna go?
Hmm.
We were my husband and I just it was one of those movies where you're like, where are you what are you doing here? We call it the Dusk to Dawn effect. I don't know if you've seen the Quentin
Oh
Tarantino
yeah.
movie Dusk to Dawn, where we started out thinking it was just going to be a caper and it was, two bank robbers, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a spoiler alert vampire movie, and we're looking at it was back when you rented movies, and we're looking at
Mm.
the back of the county of the folder, and
Case.
look,
Yeah.
yeah, and we're like, where did this come from? I did not read this. the the back of the thing. And then the what I recently saw was not something that you can get on Netflix, but we have a lively theater theater arts in Nevada City, Grass Valley, where I live, and a group, Sierra Stages, just staged Sense and Sensibility, and so I saw
Oh.
that Thursday night, and it was wonderful. It was, they worked with a very small group of actors, so people took on dual roles, which
Oh,
can be
okay.
very funny. And they dressed up as dogs as at one point and just and ran around the stage barking. And it was charming. So I'm a fan of our local theater scene because even if it's not perfect,
Mm.
that's not the point. You know,
Yeah,
the
it can't all be Broadway.
no, and you don't even want it to be. You want it to be a little bit experimental and a little bit different, and just the expression of people's creativity and their art is just always a joy to see. So that's what I've been doing recently.
Okay, so two quick questions about the
Yes.
Sense and Sensibility. So
Yeah.
first, do they emphasize more of the comedy aspects of it, or did that was just a side effect of the way they were presenting it, or just
Well, Jane Austen is very funny.
okay?
So which is not anything that anybody else in my household believes. But she is very, very funny. And I think that when a director or a playwright who's like reimagining, the scenes, that if they go towards that humor, then you understand kind of the angst of what, the core themes of all of her books, which are this is a do or die situation for a young woman.
Hmm.
Finding that right partner is critical. And sometimes we forget that all of their fortunes are tied up with who they marry. And if you marry badly, you are really in a world of hurt. So it still comes off that way, but it was done a little more dramatically. And they forwarded the humorous characters.
Hmm. Okay. And so
Yeah.
the other question is because you said there were people taking on multiple roles.
Yeah.
Were there, because I've seen this in a couple of shows, like especially like a two-man show where each actor takes on like 10 roles. And so
Oh,
like
yeah.
they'll step off stage and they'll be back on stage in like 7 seconds in a totally different costume. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if that was at least a part of the show, like, someone steps off, oh, I'll get him, and it goes off and comes
Right.
back as that other character.
What they did was very clever, and I've seen this done in I go regularly to Oregon Shakespeare Festival,
Hmm.
and so I've seen it done up there. But what they did this time is that they were short, or maybe they just did it on purpose because it was interesting. So they had one young lady who was going after a young man whose sister kind of controlled the family. That young lady was played by the sister, the same actress. So she's like talking and saying, "Oh, but she's such a wonderful person," and because she's the same
Oh,
actress.
okay.
So it gave it a layer that was very humorous. That
And
they
the audience was in on the joke.
and the audiences absolutely was in on the joke. And I think too that sometimes we forget that the audience can be very um not only forgiving but enthusiastic about playing along. We are
Mm.
there to suspend disbelief. And so if the director comes at it and says, "Okay, we've got a dummy who needs to play this person because clearly the actress needs to play this other part, so just go with it." And we all nod our heads and like, "Yeah, we'll go for it. Yeah, we got that."
Okay, well that sounds great. I mean, I haven't seen live theater in quite some time, but when I do, it's always enjoyable because you can see the enthusiasm and the excitement that the actors have for presenting
Oh,
the material. And they, yeah, like you said, they throw themselves into the material.
they really do. So, and along those lines, I was at last year at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. They were performing Romeo and Juliet, and every major actor got sick. And so it was
Oh
packed
no.
with like five understudies. Well, all of the understudies apparently had called up their family members who were local, and the theater was packed with family members watching, quote, Sue and John and Fred's debut. And so every time one of these new understudies walked on, the whole crowd
Just exploded with
erupted.
applause.
Oh my God, it was so, but again, it was so just warm and generative and supportive. It was a lovely experience. And they did great. The understudies were wonderful in their parts. There was one who was even, she had to read from a script in her hand. And we were just asked as an audience to say, we just threw her on, like she got the script, 4 minutes ago. So
Oh
if you can
no.
forgive us. And
Well,
the
it's not like
audience
she
said,
was not like she
sure.
was taking off her hat and like reading from the script inside the
Right.
hat.
No, no, she just walked out with a piece of paper in her hand. She says, we're just not even going to try to tell you that this is anything else. So I like that
Better to
about it.
read from the script on stage than to attempt to and just, muck it
Oh,
all up.
100%. And that's where they went. That was the artistic director's determination. And it
Hmm.
worked beautifully. And I sat there, great. You're just doing, she's a bit walk on part. And she delivered the lines so that other people would get the right ones to pick up off of. And they were all great.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, well, let's start talking about Catharine Bramkamp, the writer. Actually, I will read the bio that's on the back of her book out loud.
Okay.
Catharine is a world traveler, poet, and belly dancer. Always good. In her spare time, she coaches writers from concept to publication, lectures on history and creativity, and facilitates writing workshops. Pay attention to that. She is the author of 27 books, more or less. I like that too. She lives with her supportive husband in the aforementioned Nevada City, California. So, Catharine, let's talk a little bit about you. Like, how did you get your start? Were you like one of those, you know, precocious kids who was always writing, or were you a voracious reader? Were you just like, I've got to have an outlet for my creativity. I'm gonna take a pen and a piece of paper and just go at it.
Okay, pretty much yes.
Okay.
Have you interviewed writers before?
That's the thing
Um,
is that every writer has a different origin story.
yeah, I was talking, that was interesting. I was at I'm also a poet and we have a poetry festival coming up. We used to call this in radio, shameless plug, but a poetry festival coming up on the 12th of April. And we were doing some video reels for Instagram. And one of the other poets said, when did you all, to the other four of us, when did you start writing poetry? Which is another, when do we start like writing, anything? Most of us will, I started writing on on the living room walls with orange crayons. So that was my first foray into the art form. Um, it's gone now.
I
That
was
my
gonna say
mother
your mother was your toughest critic.
totally did not preserve the work. It was brutally edited. Uh, and I start as soon as I could write, I would write, but I probably didn't get like serious quote unquote into it till about age 12, 13, when we're in sixth, seventh grade. I think there's a lot, and that was true of a lot of my cohorts in that group. And they said, yeah, you start getting, first of all, you're much more angsty at about that age. So you have a lot more to say. So I think
Hmm.
that helps. And then the other is I think that there's a developmental platform you reach, and then you say, oh, this is my art. I'm not interested in baseball. I'm interested in writing, and the reading becomes easier and easier if you're a reader. So you start reading huge books on everything you can get your hands on. And I did. I was a voracious reader, still am, because that feeds the art form.
Hmm. So I guess the inevitable follow-up question is that if you think back to some of that material that you wrote, back in, early teen years, would you let anybody read it now?
Nope, those have been recycled and pulped. Absolutely not.
Pretty much every writer says that too. Like for me, it's screenwriting, and would you let anyone take a look at like the first script you ever read? Oh, good Lord, no, because it's awful.
No,
But when you're writing it, you don't know it's awful. It's
no,
only after time and developing the craft that you realize you didn't know what you didn't know back then.
And the only way to know, I think, is to do that really bad work. I think it's really unfair for people to say, especially if they're just starting out, and you can start writing and your art at any age. You're starting out and you think, oh, but this isn't perfect. How come I can't write this perfectly? Well, if you have somebody like us and we've been writing really horrible things since the sixth grade, we
Mm.
have a lot more experience. And eventually, as we figure it out, because you have to write to do it. I mean, you can study all you want, but you still have to write to make it to learn. It's going to be terrible. That's the whole point.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, like for
Yeah.
with screenwriting, that's why they call it the very first draft. So it's also known as the vomit draft because you're just getting it
Yeah.
on the page
Yeah.
because it's easier to have something that's really, really bad that you can go back and work on it and edit it
Yes.
and tweak it and change it. And as a couple of past guests have said, you can't edit a blank page.
Right.
For all those writers who are thinking, well, I'm not going to try because it's not going to be perfect. Well, don't expect it to be because it ain't going to
No,
be.
I call them, especially after writing, like I've done Nano more a lot,
Hmm.
frequently, and I've produced books out of it. But that first effort, those first 50,000 words that you're just doing, which is a great exercise in
Hmm.
November. Um, I call them raw drafts. They're not even a first draft. It's like it's just bleh. Like just like you said, it's a little less than vomit. I kind of raw seems a little nicer.
Sure, sure. I think I usually, yeah, I don't use it myself. I just call it like here's my very first draft, and people totally understand what that
Yeah.
means. Okay, so you started writing early teen years, and obviously kept it going into adulthood. So one of the things I wanted to really ask you about is that you had a series of books. I may get this wrong. Was it Real Estate Mysteries?
Real estate diva
Diva.
mysteries.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so explain what that means
Uh-huh.
and what was it that led you into writing those?
Well, I went into real estate and got my broker's and got my broker's certificate. And it was an unfortunate time period in real estate where there wasn't a lot going on. So my timing was bad for that particular career. But after 3 years, I got 5 books out of it. So I consider that the win. I just was so intrigued about the whole world of real estate, and I was in Sonoma County. So think of Marin and Sonoma County as your
Sure.
position. And I thought, I was in an open house, and I thought, what would happen if you found a dead body in an open house? And I started kind of from there. Plus, the character started talking to me.
Oh.
And as you know, if you have a character who's talking to you, you need to take dictation until they're done talking. And it took my character, the diva,
Hmm.
Allison Little, it took her 5 books.
Wow.
It took 5 books to finish her story. But I'll never forget. So I walk into MLS meeting, which is all the real estate agents get together, and in the old-fashioned days, shared information about listings and things. And someone said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I've got this house listed and this house listed, and I'm working on a book about a real estate agent who finds a dead body in her listing." And the other agent said, "Oh, have you been talking to Bob?" And I said, "Oh gosh, I'm not even original."
I was thinking that when you said that, someone said, "Oh, let me tell you about when, you know."
Right. Right. I am not even that original. It's like they find agents find all sorts of crazy stuff in their house. And so it's really ripe. It was ripe for a series because you can go from house to house, and Allison can go from agent to agent. She can go from each house that she lists has a different personality attached, and the buyers
Hmm.
and the sellers are going to be different. And you can just skew all of it. So that's also fun. For me, just skewed the business. I had I was in nonprofit for a while, so I had a moment where I could skew all of nonprofit because it got to me. So you can do that as a writer. It's fun and it's funny, and then you get it out of your system and you stop annoying your friends.
That's great. Okay, so let us move on to okay, so you did your real estate diva mysteries and you're dabbling in poetry and doing all of these things. So what led to Out Loud, a writing adventure for women? And it looks
Ah,
like you're turning on the light or the fan there.
no, I've got the Now my neighbor is using his gas powered leaf blower, so it's a little. Didn't want you to hear that. Um, Out Loud came out of a writing group that I run. I run a writing group called Lunch Launch because we meet at lunch. That not original. And I had five women who are working on various projects. And when I was working with one of them, she had just finished a book, and I just was coaching her through it. So I wasn't even a beta reader. I was just working with her on the book. And she said to me after a few glasses of wine, you need to write all of this down because everything you say to us is so interesting. I'm quoting her. Um, and you should put all this in a book. And I looked at her like, I don't have time to write a book. I've got other things going on. I've got grant proposals. I've got all sorts of other stuff. And then I woke up the next morning and the muse said, "Oh, that's a really good idea. I'm going to give you 100, I'm going to give you 25 chapters right now. You better be ready to take dictation." Okay. So I wrote the book very quickly. I got the idea in July and I published the book in January.
Wow, that is fast.
So it was
Uh,
very fast because I had been doing a lot of coaching. I write a blog. I write a newsletter. So there was information out there. And that's what I tell people who write nonfiction is like, you have a lot of stuff you already wrote that you can put
mhm,
in a book. It's just a
right.
case of finding it in your files. And so really, it really, turned out. And one of the reasons that, because you're going to ask why women, because a lot of times I read books and I've read a lot of books about writing and about creativity. And if the book is written by a man, for the most part, there is as an assumption that the man is going to write and the artist is going to be creative, everything's going to be great, and someone else is bringing lunch. Someone else has done the laundry. Some mysterious person has cleared the house. And for women, we're that mysterious background person. So how do women figure out how to be creative if you also have to do the laundry and do the dishes, etc.? Now,
Hmm.
my personal relationship isn't like that, but I know enough women where it is. And so that's why I wanted to skew it a little bit towards what women's experiences are. That said, I had some beta readers say, "I love the way you talk about creativity after the age of 50, and you need to do a book on that and include men and women." So
Hmm.
that's
Okay.
kind of where
Well,
I went.
okay, sure. I understand. Excuse me. I understand that. I guess while I was reading it, I didn't really get it didn't strike to me that it was really for women. It just that it
Yeah,
was more like you're
it
a
could be.
writer and here are
Yeah,
things that you should keep in mind. Like I think you because just a quick side note that Catherine and I met at the San Francisco Writers Conference earlier this year, and I think you were there for my screenwriting presentation,
yeah,
which is pretty much just the basics 101, and
yes, yeah, and I
it's
enjoyed
not
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay, it's not geared towards anybody. It's geared towards
right.
anybody who wants to be a screenwriter. And so while I was reading your book, again, out loud, writing adventure for women, that it just a lot of the things, even though some of them didn't apply to me, about publishing, though I've had
Yeah,
experience in that, that a lot of it still applied to me and things that I could
yeah,
take a message from or get, it could apply to me.
yeah. I
Even,
think so. I definitely think so. And it was just a little focus. It was to narrowcast the audience because that helps when you publish on Amazon to
mhm,
have a more focused
sure.
audience. But I agree. I read tons of books by guys. I mean, there's no creativity is creativity.
Yeah, sure. Actually, that's one thing I noticed is that the book, as you said, it's a huge collection of information that I wrote it. It's a combination of handbook, advice, and recommendations. Now, you said you wrote it quickly. Was that your intent to kind of do it, or were you just kind of like, were you starting to write things and just realize, oh, I can also include this, and like you had a post-it note off on the side, like don't forget to
Yes,
include, this,
yes.
this, and this.
It grew organically. So it wasn't I didn't have any I wasn't focused on it has to be this big or this
Hmm.
small. I mean, that's the one thing about publishing now. You're not held to a certain number of any words. You just
Sure.
write enough and say what you're going to say. I did add on one of my beta readers asked me to create at the very end of each chapter kind of a summary, things to do. And so
Yeah.
I went back and did that and then realized that's perfect for posts on Instagram or posts on Facebook. So it created an easy, quick Instagram, social media kind of event. So I did that.
Yeah, I did that. I had a question about that because I said that I liked how each, quotes and quotes chapter is followed by like a handful of bullet points or highlights
Yeah.
from that chapter. And I was curious, like, was this kind of like, okay, here's what you just read. Here are the important things to remember from what these, 5 or 6 pages you just read.
Yeah, that was the request of the beta readers. And they said, and they just commented, they said, we love this in other books and you might want to do that too. And it wasn't fortunately, it wasn't hard to do because
Hmm.
I did have points. I just pull, oh, all right, yes, I can do this. Boom, boom, boom. Here's the five. I kept it to either five or six.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. And then one of the things I also wanted to ask you about is that because I really didn't know what to expect when I started the book,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I'm reading through it, and okay, it's 5 or 6 pages to a chapter, and then the little, here's the important things to remember,
Mhm.
and to me it was almost like it was this huge collection of I don't know, articles or blog posts? And is that how you decided to put the whole thing together? Or when you started, did you have an idea of what it was going to be like? Or did it kind of like take shape as you were working on it?
It took shape as I was working on it, and it's you never know what's going to inspire you. So when I commissioned the cover, a cover designer, and when she came back with the boat with all of this, because it's disparate
Sure.
items in the
Yeah.
boat,
Sure.
I thought, well, first of all, I have to live up to the cover, and then second of all, then that said, oh, it is like an adventure because you start out, you don't, it's kind of the hero's journey. You don't really want to do this. So what's the creativity part of this? And then working away to, when you get to the end of the journey, what are you going to find?
Hmm.
You hit Ithaca, what are you going to find? Well, it's going to be, publishing, which is great, but it's never as great as people fantasize. So I wanted to address that. It's like, because actually then you go back to the beginning of the book and you start over.
Sure, sure. I also wanted to ask that you incorporate a lot of your personal experience into throughout the entire book, but it's not the dominant thing. It's not about here's what happened to me and here's a lesson you should take from it. So I think you use it very well, not sparingly, but probably just the right amount
Oh,
that
thanks.
you talk about, here's things you might want to keep in mind. And then in the next chapter, here's something else I wanted to talk about, and here's my experience with it, but you also don't beat the reader's head over it
Yeah.
with these like here's me talking about me some more, and
Yeah.
here's a tidbit that you should take away from it. So what did you make an effort to include things where applicable, or did you think, okay, oh, I have a great story about this, and I want to make sure to include it in this chapter?
I would say that I was very picky about that because it's like if my story was going to work, and we all know that both fiction and nonfiction are story driven because we're story driven creatures. So if I had a story that had the beginning, the middle, and the end, and had some sort of punch to it that illustrated a point, great. Otherwise, I have so many stories from clients that I could use theirs to good effect as well. So I really wanted it to not be. It's all about me. Did I tell you about me? Oh, and by the way, this is what I experienced. And
Sure.
I am, 'cause we've read those books, right? I am fabulous. And let me tell you how to write just
And let me
like
tell you
me.
why I'm fabulous.
Yes, and yeah, let me go over this. And oh, look, here's some reviews. Oh, they're about me. Yeah, I just really did not want to do that because I want it to be helpful. I want people to read it and relate to it and say, oh, that's something that I've experienced too. That is more the goal, is to say you're not alone.
Hmm.
People have gone through this, and everybody, if at some point is going to go through some frustration, or they're going to be blocked, or the muse is going to abandon them. So then how can we help?
Yeah, that's one thing that I've talked about a lot with, especially with screenwriting, that for the most part, writing pretty much in any capacity is a solitary activity, not counting if you have a partner. But I think it's a great reminder to a writer to, I guess, get a little nudge saying, you're not alone. And
Yeah,
every writer has gone through what you're going through, the frustration, the disappointment, the exhilaration, the joy of something actually working or figuring out a story problem. And having a book like this, I think it's a good reminder to writers that this is if you think you're alone, you're not.
yeah.
Even the writer of this book went through all these kinds of things,
Oh Lord,
and
yes. Yeah,
because I've also talked about this before, that even though you're writing by yourself and there are other writers, that you need to become part of the writing community,
yeah,
because everybody can relate to what you're going through, and it helps to find that kindred spirit.
yeah.
Find someone who knows exactly what you're going through, and that they can help you get through it.
Yeah. And I think too, and we experienced this with the San Francisco Writer Conference. And if you're at a good conference, that those are the writers you're going to come across. But to be really, if you're a new writer, ask questions. And if you're a more experienced writers, give answers. Be generous with with time and enthusiasm. So I was down in the ballroom helping writers get connected up with their agents because they had appointments and it was all very regimented, which it needed to be. And two writers came to me and they said, "How we don't need our next appointment. How do we skip that? We paid $50 for it, but we don't need it." I said, "Well, why don't you need it?" And they said, "Because the first agent we talked to took our book." And I was just like, I was so thrilled for them. And it was so lovely to be thrilled because if they go home and say that to their family might not appreciate what a big deal that is, right?
Sure, sure.
So I was like super enthusiastic. And then I said, well, you can either get your money back or go find an author who couldn't afford the $50 to meet with an
Oh,
agent and give him your place. And they really liked that. And so they said, oh, maybe we'll go do that. I said, go pay it forward.
yeah,
So
that is something that I'm a huge believer in. It's not just about networking, but trying to help other writers when I can. That
yeah,
even if it's in the smallest of capacities, that I'll be online on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, and I'll see someone saying, like, "Oh, I'm having trouble with this first act," and some people will write back saying, "Oh, happy to take a look, or I'll offer you my 2 cents." And
nice.
some writers are like, "Oh, thanks, this would be great. I really appreciate it." And some just you never hear from them again. And
Yeah.
like the ball's in your court.
Yeah.
If you want to take me up on the offer, that's fine.
Oh, yeah.
That
Yeah.
that is something I did want to ask you about. Is that a lot of the stuff in your book, Out Loud, or Writing Adventure for Women, is that there's a lot of information that can help out writers, especially when they're starting out.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of information there. So what about a writer who maybe like has a couple of projects under their belt, or they've been doing it for a while, so they're a little more seasoned? Uh, do you think that there are still some lessons that they can take away from the content of the book?
I think definitely because even though, and we do say this, even though a person has written 13 books or 96 books or however many that they've managed to create, it's like when we are looking at that blank page and we have a brand new project to do, it resets. You're back. You're just back at where you started. It's like, are we back here again? Really, really? Shouldn't this be super easy at this point? And I don't think it ever is if you're committed to your art form. I don't think it
Mhm.
ever is like really super easy that you're just knocking it off. There's some writers who are very good at getting back on the saddle. It's like, okay, I'm going to write this book and then this, and this. But I think in some cases you can keep going if you're writing almost a continual book. So it's like you have the same characters, you know what they're going to do, and you're not facing a new project. But a lot of us want new projects. We're artists. You
Mhm.
don't I churning out the same thing over and over again gets a little bit tedious.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And I can totally relate about the whole, hitting the reset button. Like I'm working on a new story now, and it's really hard,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm like but I'm slowly chipping away at it piece by piece. Yeah, and I like to say any progress is good progress. I only may like crank out a couple of ideas for like 3 to 4 scenes, but that's 3 to 4 scenes at the end of the day that I didn't have yesterday. And
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
even taking a couple of small steps a day, it gradually completes that long journey. And I think that's part of the enjoyment for me is the whole creative process is figuring stuff out, finding not only coming up with the puzzle pieces, but trying to put them together so that actually makes the
Yeah.
picture that I want at the end. But the thing is, when I'm starting, I don't know exactly what that picture looks like. But
Yeah.
it's trying to it's to me it's the joy of the discovery of
Hmm.
figuring out the story.
I think so. And I also think it's something much more entertaining to think about. I think our art, especially when we're feeling a little stressed about things that are out of our control, art is a great thing to occupy your mind with. And, if I'm sussing out a project or a plot line in a new book or working on a poem, that's energy that's going towards art, not towards making yourself crazy or giving yourself a heart attack from anxiety or overeating, or there's so many other options available. And I think of that when I dance, because I dance with a troupe. And if I start really, really getting it into my head in a bad way, I try to shift and say, let me review the choreography. Let me review what I'm supposed to be doing, because then it gets me in a different mindset. And that I for any of us, that kind of art can really save our sanity.
Oh, very much so. And I think part of it is just the joy of working through it.
Yeah.
And also that it's frustrating when you're starting because you're so used to having something finished and you've probably worked on it for God knows how long and it's
Hmm.
polished and you've done so many drafts and rewrites and edits and tweaks that you're you're starting a new project having just completed another one. And so that previous one is just like, oh, this is as ideal as it can be. And then you like just step right back into the square one. It's like, oh my God, you forget how daunting the work ahead of
Yeah.
you is.
But
But
it's,
but but the thing is you throw yourself into it
yeah.
because you this is something that like that's the thing is that I love this part of the process. And I am willing to aggravate myself by doing this.
I think so. I also think that we get our beautiful finished product, and for like screenwriting, it's gonna go in for edits or go into pre-production, or that phase. And if for books, you're gonna publish it. Now you need to promote it. Now you need to do all of the things that go with that quote ideal promote ideal publication moment. That's really not what artists are necessarily good at all. And it's hard. And I work with clients to break up what that promotion looks like so they're not daunted. But the next thing I tell them is like, start a new project, start something that's
Hmm.
creative, that's messy, so that you have the tidy organizational part of promotion on one side. And then on the other side, you're just starting to fling stuff back on the wall, and it's much more exciting to do that. And it keeps you going, because just doing businessy promotion stuff is really hard for a creative mind.
Yeah, that's true. That raises a great point. Like, what if you're working with a client and they're working on, we'll say they're working on a book,
Mhm.
but they're still trying to figure out the story and they're getting more and more frustrated. I mean, and they just say, you know what? I just want to stop. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Would you encourage them to try a different project, or maybe, they've been working on this one for so long? I mean, how do you keep them going? How do you, rejuvenate their creative juices?
I tell them to do a different project. I definitely tell them there's two methodologies that you can use. Let's say your artist is working on a book and it's not going anyplace. And this is true. I have a friend in the Lunch Launch group who was working on this very intense book, and started to make her anxious. It
Mm.
got to be because sometimes if we're working on memoir or working on something that's very personal, it's very draining. You have to be you have to protect your psyche when you're
Hmm.
writing these things. And I said, you know what? You might want to work on something else. What else do you have? And she told me, she says, oh, I'm working on some short stories that are kind of memoir-ish, and it's about my Catholic girlhood. And I said, do those. And sure enough, she's got 10 now. She's
Wow.
got it, she's got enough for a book because it just freed her up to to have something else. I also recommend having and doing art that's not writing. So like
Hmm.
that's why I dance, or maybe you take a pottery class, or you say, okay, I'm going to go do an art journal, or I'm going to go, I don't know, do yard work even. I'm going to be a landscape artist, but something that's very, very physical, do that to balance out the fact that you just keep staring at the same 60 words and you can't get past them. And I think having a couple of projects simultaneously is also helpful. And some people will say, well, don't I just dig in and I just go, I need to write the
I
novel.
force
I'm
myself to finish.
just going to do this. No, 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 because it's going to look terrible. You're going to read that
Mm.
those squeezed out words and you're just going to think, what was I thinking? But if you move over and you say, or I'm going to write an aria, it's going to suck, but it's going to be different.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that
And
happens that happens a lot with me is that if I like I'm trying to figure something out and I just can't, I will step away from the computer and I'll go to the gym. I'll take the dog for
yes,
a walk or it's this late in the afternoon and so I got to make dinner.
yeah,
And actually and for me, cooking and baking, it's not just therapeutic, but it gets my mind off of the project. However, while I'm working on it, even though I'm most likely listening to a podcast, while I'm doing that, in the back of my head, I'll still be going over my story problem. And maybe like, I don't know, 2 out of 3 times, 3 out of 5 times, some kind of idea will pop in that when I wasn't expecting it and I wasn't obsessing over it. I just kind of thought,
that's it.
I'm gonna let it stew in the back of my mind. And if something comes, great. If not, that's okay too, because I'll have dinner ready. So
Right. Yeah, or you got the walk-in, or you got, the dog is happy.
yeah, yeah.
You have a positive thing. I was really surprised. Like I said, I went to see Sense and Sensibility, went to the theater, had a lovely time, came home, went to sleep, woke up next morning and says, oh, wow, I need to do a survey for this next book. And I sat down and the first thing in the morning, wrote out the survey, wrote out, who I would do the outreach and sent it off to a couple of beta readers for feedback. And that was a completely unrelated art that I just experienced, but it was generative. So anything that we do just to get out of your headspace. And I don't know, okay, to be honest, I don't know if social media or even any video work does the job. I think you have to personally experience it. So you
Mm.
personally go for a walk. Cooking is wonderful because it's a different thing, or maybe you sew or knit, anything where your body is actually engaged. And I think that then frees up our subconscious to keep working on what we need to have worked on.
Yeah, I would say that because it's easy for a writer to fall down that rabbit hole of being on social media or watching stuff
Yes.
on YouTube because it's occupying your brain and it's almost like a blocker to your creativity because you're so focused on what you're reading or watching that it shuts it down and it's
Yeah.
counterproductive. So that
Yeah.
like I said, that's why I step away from the computer because if my eyes are not focused on something, I'm a lot more likely to let my mind wander. And a lot of times that really helps.
They say that there's a lot of studies on that, where that's why walking has been emerging, so to speak, as a thing, which
Hmm.
is so ironic. But you guys should walk. Who knew? Um, but it's the getting out, and it's actually about focus because when you walk, you have a broader focus. You're not as pinpointed on each letter or on those tiny little screens. We're looking at our phones. It's like, oh, look, there's a little video from Instagram. Isn't that fun? It's a broader look, and that changes how our brain is working. And I really, really think that. So if I'm upset or if I'm stuck, I'm like you, if I'm stuck with something, I leave the building
Mm.
because just staring at that screen is not going to do any good.
No, that is very true. And so all of the things that we've been talking about, these are this and a whole lot more you can find in Catherine's book, Out Loud, a Writing Adventure for Women, and the
And men
invisible
too.
subtitle and men. So okay, so what is up next for you? I mean, so you've got this book. I mean, are you going to do a little bit more fiction, more poetry? And you said you work with writing groups. I mean, so what is next? Do you have more books in the pipeline?
I do. I have three. Are they right here? Yes, they are. I have four poetry collections that kind of I ended up launching them at the same time. I did not finish them at the same time. One of them is based on Ulysses by James Joyce because everybody has that memorized. And you can see it. There you go.
There we
So
go.
that one is called Sad Music for the Perfect Soul. And I have a book of poetry based on the writing of women who supported artists. So I call it the artists you do know supported by the women you don't. And it's like Mabel Loomis who supported and edited Emily Dickinson's work. And if it wasn't for Mabel, you wouldn't know about Emily. So I wrote poems based on their own words because I like to forward women's work. And then I am working on a book on creativity. So that should come out in 2026. I think I'm going to call it Taking Up Space. And it's about finding your creative outlets and your art in the second half of your life.
Okay,
So
that sounds great. So Catherine, so where can people get in touch with you to find out more about you and your books, and including if they wanted to get a copy of Out Loud?
they can go to the best place is my website because I have that pretty well populated with what I'm currently doing. And it's Catherine Bramkamp because some people didn't renew their domain name early enough. So Catherine-Bramkamp.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter at there. And I do a newsletter once a month, not a lot. I probably should do more, but I'm too lazy. And and in the newsletter and in the website, you can find out what's going on. We're doing a poetry crawl. If you want to drink and listen to poets, we've got you covered. That's coming up on Saturday, the 29th. And I work on a poetry festival and a writers conference in the wintertime and early spring. And you can hear about all of the books that I'm doing.
Okay, and what if people want to find out more or follow you on social media? Where can they find you?
C. Bramkamp, I think I'm C. Bramkamp on Facebook, Catherine Bramkamp on Instagram and on Facebook. So you can follow me on both of those pretty easily.
Okay, we'll try to work that in.
I
Uh,
stuck with my name. That seemed to be much better than trying to come up with something clever.
No, no, that makes total sense. So again, we have been talking to Catherine Bramkamp, and her book is Out Loud: A Writing Adventure for Men. See, I'm changing the title on
See,
you already.
already.
A Writing Adventure for Women (parentheses) and Men. Catherine, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. My social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, which is maximumz.blog. Still on Twitter for the time being. Who knows how long that's going to last? At maximum_Z. And this show's account is at podcast, CWL. I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram, and that handle is at Pez Screenwriting, at PEZ, because those are my initials. The show also has a Blue Sky account, again, at podcast, CWL. And I got some books too. The Go Ahead and Ask books on Amazon, the ones about screenwriting and Pi, two very
Yeah.
wonderful things. Like I said, that's Catherine. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.